Now behave.
I won't.
Okay. So today I'm here with Dr. Natasha Nicholson, who is the founding director and a lead consultant for Star Helix. Hi, Natasha. How are you?
Hello, I'm very well, thank you. Victoria Urban, how are you?
Oh, yeah. So Tasha and I are friends. I'm proud to say that. I'm not going to call her doctor, if that's okay. Um, but yeah, you are a doctor. You do have a PhD, and your PhD is one of the most exciting things on the planet and out of this planet, might I say. So, can you just quickly tell the listeners, viewers, who you are and how you ended up in space?
Sure, well, as Victoria has already introduced me, it, yes, Dr. Natasha Nicholson, my PhD was in astrobiology at the University of Edinburgh, technically located in the School of Physics and Astronomy. And I was looking at how bacteria who extract minerals from rocks in a process known as biomining, which can be used commercially, how they form biofilms and extract those minerals under different gravity conditions. So we actually sent our experiment to the International Space Station and checked this process under 0G, Martian gravity, and at 1G, those higher gravity conditions using the cubic centrifuge up there.
Wow, that's amazing. Can you just tell us what got you interested in space?
Well, I suppose I was always kind of interested in space, but never thought that I would have the opportunity to work even tangentially with space research because I had no confidence in myself as a scientist. In fact, my first degree was in literature, and then I moved into environmental science, and then I discovered that astrobiology was actually a real thing and not some sci concept or crazy people walking around the desert with tinfoil hats. Not that, okay, crazy people is a very mean term. Eccentric people, there we go. Yes. So, um,
Do you know who you're talking to? Eccentric people. Okay.
eccentric person, but I don't walk around in tinfoil hats. That's really my main takeaway message here. Is it's
Yeah,
a real
no.
science. A lot of people these days have now begun to hear about it, but NASA do astrobiology. It's it's really this sort of, it uses all sciences to answer four fundamental questions, which are: how did life form on this planet? What are the extremes that life can tolerate? Where else in the observable universe may fall within those extremes where we might want to start looking for life? And how is Earth life affected by space environments? And that was really what my PhD was looking at.
That's really exciting. Okay, and how did Star Helix come about? What do you do at a Star Helix?
So since graduating from my PhD nearly 10 years ago, I have primarily been acting at the interface of academia, industry, and government, bringing together multidisciplinary projects. Because, as I said, astrobiology in itself is quite cross-disciplinary. You use geology, physics, biology, environmental sciences, all sorts, chemistry, obviously. So I sort of took that and the fact that my own background was literature and environmental science, and started working across all the disciplines. So my first job was about bringing together health technology, energy technology, and space science, and trying to get the different players in those fields to talk together and form collaborative projects. My job after that was forming international cross-disciplinary research groups and helping to provide leadership training, and bringing in relevant expertise to provide that training. And then my most recent job prior to forming Star Helix was running the Scottish Space Cluster, and again, bringing together all the players from industry, government, and academia, and then trying to reach out into neighboring or adjacent sectors, such as robotics or financial services, sustainable manufacturing, and so on, to again build relationships and start getting some cross germination of ideas and technology. So with Star Helix, we're essentially continuing to do that, but providing it more as a service than working for an organization. So we work with multiple stakeholders, both here in Scotland and in America.
Yeah, and this is how we met, because we were both in Scotland, and then I left and you partially left as well.
Well, I'm doing a bit of ocean hopping at the moment, which isn't great from an environmental standpoint, but I'm hoping that the work we're doing overall will
Yeah,
be. So.
okay. Well, this is exciting, and I'm dying to see where your journey takes you. I'm pretty sure I have an idea, but we'll talk about that when it happens.
Should
Um,
that I'm not the only director. There are two other directors of Star Helix who both come from multidisciplinary backgrounds and who are very accomplished. And then we have a group, a little portfolio of additional consultants who come on when either who bring their own projects or come on when there's something relevant for them.
that's cool. That's exciting. Um, I would I would ask where the name came from, but I recently discovered where the name came from, and this is a homework for all the listeners and viewers to find out where Star Helix came from. Um,
There is
yeah,
a reference to something with that name, but also part of the reason was we were looking for a name that captures the sort of triple helix model, which is what you call it when you bring together industry, academia, and government. So that's where the helix is from. But yes, it does. It is a reference. I would like to know if people recognize it or not.
right. Okay. Thank you. Um, Today, well, we could talk about a lot of things. We could talk about astrobiology. I have tons of questions, but maybe next time. Today, I'm really interested in something that you did over the summer, um, which I think it was one of the most amazing things you've done in your life, or at least for me, it would have been. Uh, you went to Hawaii, and I just want to hear about Hawaii. No, you went to take part in an analog astronaut mission, and I would like to know more about that. How did you end up here? How long this mission was? What the objectives were? What can you tell about that mission?
Okay. Well, it was a great opportunity, absolutely. So one of the other directors of Star Helix applied for this a while ago and was accepted onto the mission. And I sort of came along at the last minute because they had someone drop out, and I was, the right sort of candidate for the role. So I did sort of do a last minute application and was accepted because of my background. So analog astronaut missions are primarily to test research ideas and equipment, and a lot of times the psychology and sociology of isolation. But essentially, it's a test run for actually putting up a habitat on the moon or Mars and seeing, establishing protocols and finding out what works and what doesn't before you're actually going to these very far away extreme environments. And my fellow director, Dr. Mason Robbins, was testing with one of our clients, testing experimental spacesuit technology. And I went out to do some research around algae for bioregenerative life support systems. And it's a fascinating environment. So I went to do high seas. That's the analog astronaut habitat in Hawaii. Yes, on top of a volcano, looking out over another volcano. and you're surrounded by lava beds of different types, some that you can walk on and some that you really shouldn't walk on because it's very rough and jagged. And if you want to leave the habitat, you have to go through EVA protocols, extravehicular activity protocols, and put on a spacesuit because, it was definitely, you couldn't wear one of those and survive in space. It wasn't a full spacesuit, but it was testing. The helmets were modified biker helmets, basically, but with drop-down displays to sort of show you where you were in relation to the habitat, and with cooling systems and comms inbuilt and all of that. Whereas, and then jumpsuits, gloves, knee pads, and you had to wear hiking boots. But there were still little, especially for me because I'm very tall, there were little gaps between like your gloves and the jumpsuit, and between.
Yeah, you would die.
um, Whereas maybe testing out the experimental spacesuit was properly, boom, boom, pressurized suit, not a single gap. And it would take him, I was his suit tech for the mission. So, it would take us a good, I think initially 20, 25 minutes to get him in the spacesuit. And by the end of the week, we were getting him in and out in about 8 to 10 minutes. But yeah,
Nice.
to establish that protocol and test that the suit was properly pressurized. And then he was also doing tests on like heart rate variability under different pressures. And so he would do some of the spacewalks in the spacesuits and some of them in the actual spacesuit, and then compare the differences.
So was his spacesuit different because he was testing certain things?
He brought his own spacesuit from.
All right. Okay.
So that client is Smith's Space Garments, although I believe that the client is changing their name to Smith's Exploration Garments or something. So that's still, they've been around for a while, but they're still very much in the developmental stage for a lot of their gear. But they do supply fully pressurized working space suits for other analog missions as well.
Right. Meanwhile, if you hear snoring in the background, it's my spaniel who's sleeping very near me. So I'm sorry if they're snoring. Right. So how long was this analog mission?
So this one was actually only a week, which was
Okay.
a shame because, so this was a lunar analog mission rather than a Martian one. So with a lot of Martian missions, you'll have a lag on comms of about 20 minutes away to simulate that distance. And the fact that is how long at best you would get before you would get a response. Whereas on the moon, you don't have quite such a long lag. I think it's a matter of seconds. And yeah, we were all very sad at the end because we felt, we got on well immediately. We went for a drink in town before we all got locked in the habitat. Which is this great sort of geodesic dome with 2 levels or a level and a half, and very space age. But we were just beginning to like properly bond as a crew, I think, by the time we had to leave. And some of our experiments, mine in particular, could have done with more than a week for the algae to really kind of grow and show what they were made of, so to speak.
Okay. That must have been cool. But there are longer missions, right? So some that last for even like 30, 40 days.
Oh, yeah, longer than that as well. One of my PhD cohort in our lab group went and did, I think it was maybe a 9-month mission, which is pretty.
Oh, wow.
Ones, yeah, but they've definitely had 6-month missions. And there's different science that comes out of these. So a lot of the science that's published tends to be in the sort of psychology, social studies area, looking at how isolation and confinement will affect people behaviorally and cognitively, and attention spans, attention to detail, mood, group cohesion, that sort of thing.
Yeah, see, this side really interests me because this is what I'm studying for, right? So I want to be a space psychologist, which doesn't mean being a psychologist for aliens, but examining the psychological effects of deep space travel. That's what I want my specialty to be in. So how useful are these shorter analog missions? What do you think? Because it's just basically a week, everyone can survive a week, right? Do you
Yeah.
really see psychological changes or
I mean, for that, you'd have to ask the psychologist. I think it would affect some people more rapidly than others, but and behaviorally, everyone's able to. I mean, we were lucky again; we got on really well. I think you probably can start to see fractures in groups if you've got very strong personalities.
Mhm.
Again, most like in real life, if you like, most astronauts are selected on certain psychological traits, which are around kind of not having very forcible personalities, but being quite easygoing and so forth. And we were all pretty easygoing, to be honest. And But the psychological tests we were doing were less about, yeah, there were some on mood, and there were a lot on attention to detail and what would you call it, stimuli response, like sort of the speed of that. So you know we would do the tests when we first arrived on kind of, you see a ball pop up on the right side of the screen, and then and then you have to and then it disappears, and then it comes up again, and you have to kind of click where it was the previous time, and all of this sort of stuff. So it's
Yeah.
and I would be interested to know if there had been differences after a week. I didn't actually follow up with that.
Okay. Yeah, I would be interested, but I might conduct my own study soon, so
Um,
you can take part. So what would a day be like during that analog mission? What time did you get up? What meals did you eat? Where did you sleep? How was the whole arrangement?
okay. So the days were very, very structured, which didn't agree with me so well. I quite like to choose when I'm going to do X, Y, or Z. But yes, it was a case of, so you had to be there for breakfast at 6:30. And then, there was a timetable from then on, which was, half an hour for breakfast. And then, you would all sort of get dispersed across various duties. So someone would always be assigned for cleaning up breakfast, or other people would have their cleaning like half hour. And then it would be a case of, right, you have to do this experiment now, you have to participate in this experiment now. Here you have your own time for doing your research. Here you've been booked in for an EVA for these 2 hours. Here you have to write your report on or on the previous day's activities. Here you have to fill out, a questionnaire about this. Here you have to. So the other experiments that were going on, there were people doing augmented reality experiments. There was also this robotic seal that has been developed in Japan, I think, for palliative care or for loneliness in the elderly. And it was this little fluffy, about yay big robotic seal called Paro, I think. And it makes little noises and responds to your voice and like certain touch points on its back or top of its head. And we had to spend half an hour with this thing to see how we responded to it. Um, it was very cute, but also you could hear its motors going every time it moved and went ah. So for me that kind of broke the illusion a little bit. So we slept. So I said that the geodesic dome was sort of a level and a half. So on the bottom level you had the lab right around the edge, and that was where I did my researchy bit. And then you had this the downstairs bathroom and shower, and then in a sort of, so that was like the outer cusp of the spiral, if you like. And then you come out into this more open area, which had the computers in a sort of row around one half of the wall. And behind and in that open area was also where we did our mandatory hour of exercise every day with a treadmill and a bike machine and some mats and weights. And then curving round towards the inner sort of center under the stairs and the sleeping quarters, we had the dining table and the kitchen. And then in that open area, there was a staircase that led up to 6 little bedrooms. But when I say bedrooms, I really mean a cupboard with a bed in it.
Yeah, that's how it should be, because you wouldn't have bigger space in space either.
Probably not, no. And then the upstairs toilet, basically, which were all what do you call them? Biological toilets, basically. Um, and then off to one side, sort of technically outside of that dome, there was a shipping container that that was attached via a sort of sealed airlock. And you could go through the airlock into the shipping container, and that's where all the suits and electrical equipment and everything that was sort of monitoring the habitats, temperature and air quality and CO2 levels and so on and so forth. That's where all that was based. And then if you were going out on an EVA, you had to shut both. You had to definitely make sure that the door into the hab was shut, and then you depressurized before going out. And depressurization took about 3 minutes.
And was this dome especially built for this analog mission, or do they use it for several missions?
No, it was especially built for the High Seas project, but no, it's been the same
All right.
dome for
Yeah.
a while now.
Gotcha.
10 years or more. Sorry, I don't know the
Oh,
history.
nice. So it was basically like being on the ISS without the microgravity component.
It was similar, although I think they have their time. So our time was basically divided up into half-hour or hour chunks. So I think their time is divided up into sort of like 10-minute chunks. They're
Wow.
even tightly controlled.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, it's definitely not for me. I'm not that structured. Right. So there are several analog missions going on Earth. Are there a lot of places where they do these analog missions? So I know there are some on Antarctica. Now I know that there's some on Hawaii. I know that they were organizing something in Scotland or near Scotland as well. What do you know about these missions? Where are
Um,
they located?
they're all over the world. I think I sent you a map if you want to pull that up. Which
Yes,
captures a lot of them, but possibly not all. I mean, there are new ones popping up in South America.
I
I
will.
hadn't heard of the one in Scotland, but I can believe it.
So they're trying to choose sites that are like far away from civilization, right?
A lot of them
Or
are, so it depends on the focus, really. I mean, so there's the MDRS, the Mars Desert Research Station, for example, in Utah, and that focuses more on EVA, going outside, than some of the others. And so for them, they're less high fidelity, as in sometimes you are walking outside even without a suit between the different habitats, and you just have to sort of imagine that you're in a sealed tunnel. But that's because
okay.
they do research on the psychology and sociology and some plant-based things, but a lot of their work is looking at the EVA side of things. So they've specifically chosen an area that's very Martian looking, in the desert. Whereas there are others in Poland, for example, which again, our co-director Dr. Mason Robbins, is going to be on in January, which is much more focused on life within the habitat. They don't do nearly as much stuff on EVAs, as far as I'm aware. So
Okay.
some of them are very remote, and others are less remote. But the thing they have in common is that whilst you're in there, you don't really have contact with the outside world apart from during if you're in there for months, I think you probably get a window of opportunity to speak to people every now and then. But again, if you
Of
were in a
course.
Mars simulated one, that would be with a 20-minute delay
Yeah.
between sending and receiving a response.
Okay. So you told me about the experiments that you did within the dome, but when you were performing the extravehicular activities, the EVAs, what were you doing?
Um, so there were two main experiments that were being conducted outside. One of them was obviously Mason's, with the testing the biological physiological response to wearing pressurized spacesuits, and just making sure that the tech that's been developed by Cameron Smith and his colleagues was viable. um, but because it was a pressurized suit, there are two ways of providing breathable air in that kind of situation, and one is to have diving tanks, and the other is to have an air compressor. And at this point, we now have an air compressor for testing Cameron suits, but at the time we were using dive tanks, and these dive tanks are pretty heavy, and Mason's got a lot to be thinking about, and he's got his hose to carry, and he was trying to walk freely and all of this stuff, and not get over pressurized in his suit, because
Yeah.
that can lead to problems as well as being under pressurized. So he needed an assistant basically to go out with him, and carry the tanks, and check the lines, and help him out if he got overheated. So he was doing a lot of EVAs, and the rest of the crew would get. There was sort of 5 of us in total, 6 if you include the robotic seal, which wasn't much help on an EVA. So yeah, the other 5 of us would be. The other 4 of us would take turns going out with him. And then the other bit of research that was being done outside was, so there was this fantastic girl with us called Christina Luna, and she was working for a tech company in Spain, I believe, developing AR technology, but also she was trying to motion capture people in astronaut suits so that they could make better predictions and models around people wearing spacesuits, I suppose. So she would get us to go out and do various tasks or simulate doing various tasks, and would be sort of recording that from different angles so that they could build proper models. And that was quite fun. And then towards the end of the trip, she had us doing unusual poses and unusual actions so that they could also get that, like the full range of motion within these suits. So initially she was like, go over to that tank and pretend to unscrew it, or go over to the solar panels and pretend to be like working on them. And by the end of the week, it was like, okay, see if you can throw yourself to the ground. And comms were like, please don't do that. Okay, do some dancing. So we'd be out there in these spacesuits. There's a clip of us on my Instagram tagged, where we're
That's
all
amazing. Yeah, that's
um,
cool.
for science. For science.
Science, of course, of course. No fun, just science. Would you go and take part in another analog mission? Maybe
Um,
even a longer one.
Possibly. It would really depend if where the benefit was. So the benefit for me doing this, because obviously Mason needed to do it for the spacesuit
Hmm.
side of things, and it was useful for me from a biotechnology perspective, because I now have a better understanding of the limitations in a habitat for conducting research, and yes, some of them you can predict, such as, okay, there's not quite as much equipment, or maybe there's less water, but other things such as trying to keep things sterile. Like I knew that would be a challenge, but I didn't understand quite how much of a challenge that would be. And I think I managed all right, but you know, essentially, I now, if you're designing apparatus or experimental setups, you know, if I'm aware of those limitations in the HAB, rather than just being like trying to imagine them, I can now predict them a little better. Then I can design the the apparatus or the experimental setup so that it takes those factors into consideration and will be less challenging for either future analog astronauts or future actual astronauts.
Hmm. Yeah,
So I don't
very
know if I would
exciting.
do it again. I would probably try and send apparatus into these habitats and see if other people could use them. That might be more useful for me than doing it myself again. But yeah, if there was a good enough reason to do it, I would.
Okay. I would love to go on one, or
Yeah,
maybe even just stay outside and just look at you guys like if you were in a fish tank, or
so
just
you want to be part of mission control. I see. Spying on.
yeah, of course, just to see the psychological effects. But I would send you like into a cave or to Antarctica or something like that. That would be so cool. Or underwater. Mm.
So they used to send the high seas astronauts into lava caves, lava tubes, um, to collect samples
Um,
and so forth. But I think there was some concern about the health and safety of that this time because there'd been earthquake.
yeah,
We needed to double check that so we weren't allowed to do that this time. Yeah, they do. They have done.
yeah. Okay, I'm glad you're safe and that you were safe then as well. So after the Hawaii mission, you went to Arizona. You started working on an analog astronaut facility in Arizona. Um, can you tell us more about that?
Um, so Biosphere 2 is an amazing facility that was set up back in the 80s by an eccentric billionaire and is now run by the University of Arizona. Um, a little bit of background. So the facility I'm working on is adjacent to Biosphere 2 and was the original test module for Biosphere 2. But Biosphere 2 was this enormous multi-greenhouse, very sci-fi looking building that scientists were locked in for 2 years to see if they could simulate and well, to see if they could generate enough food for themselves and keep the air levels breathable and so forth. And it was a really interesting experiment, and they didn't, they managed to live in there for 2 years, but I think they did have to have more oxygen pumped in, and they were pretty skinny by the time they came out.
Mm.
And there were lots of factors that affected all of this, and certainly the psychology was quite interesting because they did divide into sort of two teams with quite different views. And when they came out, the press deemed it a failure and all of this, but that's because they went in making some pretty big claims. As it was, I don't think it was a failure at all. I think it was a really interesting experiment. And if the press had had a slightly different line on it, then they may have had funding to do more really interesting research. As it was, it's kind of been used and then slightly abandoned and then refurbished and reused for research by a few different groups now. But it's massive. It's very cool. And they've still got a rainforest and an ocean habitat and a desert habitat and a marshland, all inside this enormous series of greenhouses that were completely pressurized and sealed off from the outside world. And underneath it is the technosphere, which is kind of like a spaceship. It's there are no windows, and there's all these pipes and pumps and generators and all sorts. Fascinating place. So the habitat facility that I'm working at, which is being managed by a very smart chap called Kai Statz. He's the sort of brains and force behind the whole thing. That's called SAM, which stands for Simulated. No, sorry, it stands for Space Analog for Moon and Mars, and it will be, as far as we know, the first fully pressurized astronaut habitat on Earth. And they've already had 2 missions, 2 inclusions. And what I've been helping to do, along with Dr. Mason Robbins, is to help build out the Mars Yard, which at the moment is a very respectable kind of square of Martian analog basalt dust. But Guy Stats has this vision of turning it into a huge crater, a huge Mars crater, with different Martian analog substrates on it, where you can do EVAs and rover testings and so forth. And then I've also been helping run some pressure tests on the inside of the habitat as well. It's fascinating. They use these things called lungs to help regulate the pressure. And another big dome, and it's really thick rubber, I think, which when it's deflated kind of sits like this, and so you've got this sort of, let's say, domey type thing, and inside the rubber's doing this, and then you pump it up, and the lung lifts like this, and it's got these metal, like these huge steel legs that it's sat on when it's not pressurized, and you can sit in there watching it, and the air pressure doesn't do anything to your eardrums, but it lifts the entire steel framework with it, and then it just sort of sits there and bobs as it regulates the air pressure. It's absolutely fascinating.
Just like a lung, yeah.
I guess. So yes, I mean, even so, the pressure tests for the inside, even the ISS has a leak rate, so it's almost impossible to stop air escaping completely. But we've sort of been going around sealing off various bits of the habitat at a time to see what the leak rates are like, and then walking around with. The first step is to walk around with incense sticks to see where the smoke is sort of drawn to.
Wow. Okay.
And then they rented a hydrogen detector or helium detector from one of their collaborators, so that they can find even smaller amounts of air escaping. Yeah, it's very, very cool.
Okay.
And I'm technically not working over there because I don't have a work visa for America right now. Luckily, Mason is American, so he's getting paid. But I'm working on other things while I'm there as well, and then it gets me a bit of experience, and I'm learning a lot. And yeah, we're working on the work visa side of things.
Yeah. Yeah. You're helping out. You're learning.
Mm-hmm.
I get that. And now you're back in Scotland for a while.
Yes, Mason's still over there, and yeah, I'm helping out other clients that we have, and catching up with friends and family, and
That's nice.
working
And
on some.
what's going to happen once that habitat is done and you have nothing else to learn? Where will life take you? What are the next steps for you?
Well, we've been invited to contribute research ideas to SAM.
Okay.
So I think, there's the possibility of continuing to collaborate with them. But again, we have other clients, some of whom are less willing to be discussed at the moment than
Yeah, sure.
others, so I can't talk about all of them. I know that we're hoping to continue collaborating and working with Cameron Smith's space garment company. We've also got clients around education and outreach. We're working with one of the American aerospace companies on developing some VR tools for astronaut training, and also for outreach. We've been invited to participate in building astronaut training programs. And then again, some of the work I'm doing around biotechnology, we've got some work in the pipeline with America for that. So there's all sorts of things really, and we have people approaching us with interesting projects, and it depends on our capacity and interest in the project to see whether or not we'll take it on. But it doesn't all have to be space based either. I'm very happy to work on terrestrial problems just using the pooled expertise of Star Helix.
Well, thank you very much for talking to me about this. And I might be in touch in the future to learn more about your fantastic and very exciting work. And if you can, if you need anyone who studies psychology and astronomy on these missions, just let me know. I might know someone.
I'll keep you in mind.
Thank you very much. Okay.
Thank you, Victoria.
Thank you, Dr. Nicholson. Bye.
Bye.